The vast majority of God's people work in the marketplace in some capacity. Whether you function in a role, a job, whether you lead a team, whether you're an entrepreneur, you own the business, regardless, you're still serving in the marketplace. Very few are independently wealthy and don't serve in that manner. God was showing me this morning how many are serving time rather than serving the kingdom. That's entirely natural. So often, it's easy to fall into the perspective of seeing it as a necessity or even a necessary evil. That's just the process to get the income, to pay the bills, to do the things we need to do. That it's something that's a requirement as opposed to recognizing it's a profound area of responsibility, of dominion God has given each one. And specifically for young warriors is growing in the understanding of the impact God desires for you to have right there. We have to first understand dominion. When God created heaven and earth, as he was making man, God said to himself, Father, Son, and Spirit, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Let him be like us. And let him have dominion. Now, some see that as rulership. But in reality, we should really see it as responsibility. God, when he was planning on making man, he delegated the responsibility and backed it up by his authority for everything he had created. And even though he knew we would make our mistakes, we would blow it, that is the profound love and generosity of God, that he wanted man not just to have a relationship, but to have purpose. And so he gave him responsibility for all that God had created. In fact, so much so, Genesis 2 kind of recounts Genesis 1. It says something pretty profound. So there were plans that God ordained. In other words, God had already planned for their creation, but they had no life yet. They weren't growing yet because there was no rain, because there was no man to manage them. There was a part of God's plan that was waiting for man to be an active participant in what God was doing. In dominion, specifically the area of dominion, that area of responsibility is a pattern that you can find throughout the Bible. A great example is Moses is getting the people ready to go into the land of promise. And God had given specific boundaries. And the land of promise was not just a place for them to possess, to lay hold of, to receive God's greater blessings. On top of that, there were standards. There were things God wanted them to accomplish in that area. They were responsible for the outcome in that area. And it's a recognition that while we all have a number of assignments in our life, and assignments are just in places where we are expected to not just thrive, but to release the gifting, everything God has put inside of us. So whether you're, in my case, a husband, a father, so on, each one of those are assignments. But the marketplace is one of the most profound areas of responsibility, most profound areas of dominion of them all. It's an area that can bring promotion, blessing, and so on. But it's also about having the right perspective. Joseph, the story everyone loves. Joseph, the story of the overnight promotion from prison to power. But what you see is all of Joseph's life, including that dramatic promotion in the process, he was serving, he worked for the benefit of Egypt in the process. And he did so in Potiphar's house, in prison, and then on a more profound scale, working for Pharaoh. He literally was working for the benefit of Egypt. But out of that was not just his promotion, but the provision for his family in Goshen. It was the catalyst for them to become this mighty nation that could begin to take possession of the greater things God had waiting for them. And it's not just Joseph. We see it again throughout the Bible. Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. What happened? They were working for the benefit of a foreign land. It was an ungodly king. And there were a number of profound tests along the way of their faithfulness. But in the process, they were continually promoted. They brought blessing to even that ungodly nation. Esther, so on. There's so many stories. But again, it's the recognition that we're not there just to serve time, just to fulfill a role, but it's accepting that mandate, recognizing it as a mandate, as a kingdom warrior, that every area you work in the marketplace, that is God's delegated responsibility to each one of us, that we are to bring his favor, his blessing, his innovation, that literally to bring his success to whatever it is that we are employed in until God promotes us to something else. It reminds me of not too long ago, a friend really challenged my thinking that how often we fall into the trap of thinking it's just about God's people. And when it says God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, we kind of put that into the context of God's people. But in reality, God so loved the world, and it's not even just humanity. The world literally means cosmos. God so loved all of his creation, he gave his son. So it's the recognition that when we're in the marketplace, in any fashion, it's a delegated responsibility. Even if you're the boss, so to speak, entrepreneur or whatever, David came to the realization that God had made him king for the benefit of God's people. That we are there in each one of those roles for the benefit of others. We're there for the benefit of the employees. We're there for the benefit of the boss, the customer, whatever it may be. So here's the challenge, is recognize, even if it's a job you're not, a role you're not absolutely enamored with, recognize when you're faithful in the little, God gives you the greater. In a way, it's a test. But more importantly, recognize it as delegated responsibility and begin to ask God to show you how to be effective, be more effective, how to bring his favor, how to bring his blessing, how to bring greater success, innovation. Ask him to give you revelation, ideas, concepts that will benefit them, because in their blessing, you will be blessed. The area of responsibility, that dominion, and one of the most profound in each one of our lives is that marketplace role. It's the area of opportunity to bring that living demonstration of the reality of God's kingdom into a whole new area. And that doesn't necessarily mean it will always be easy. But even in the challenges, that's when God is demonstrating his power, his love, his grace, his mercy through you, and demonstrating you as a kingdom warrior.